that could be another topic, what's violent and what's not violent in this context too.
Right.
All right. So if we were starting, I would thank you, Thomas, for joining me on this Zoom call. It's the ambition of the Relevance Committee to make each and every visitor to the Krishna temples feel welcome, to feel like they want more and not that they want less. And I mentioned your name to them as an example that I've met and I've seen in action. You're now in New Vrindavan, which attracts thousands and thousands of tourists a year. So what we want to do is pick your brain. I want to encourage you to speak as much as you'd like on the area of hospitality. What does hospitality actually mean? And how does it express itself through the Bhakti culture?
Well, thanks. It's a delight to be with you, and thank you for your warm welcome. You're already modeling hospitality right from the outset. And personally, I just want to say how much your kindness and hospitality towards me brought me to this place on the Bhakti path, and equally observing you, especially after Sunday feast, going around to each of the tables and greeting visitors and making them feel welcome and learning about them. And, as we've discussed before, that's the essence of hospitality. It comes from the same word that we get hospital from. It's any place that we create in the world that's a place of healing and respite and a place of wholeness. In a word, it's making room or space for the other person. So anytime we open our hearts to the other, anytime we show compassion to a living entity, that's showing hospitality. And if we can carry that mood of making space for the other into our temple hospitality, I think it can really help us welcome the many, many seekers that are coming into our temples, that are looking at Bhakti yoga, that are on the fringes of our society, trying to find community, that we're meeting them with this mood of holy hospitality.
I know if we go back in the days when I was in the movement and it was just getting started, we would go out and distribute books. The books would talk about the culture of Krishna consciousness, the culture of Bhakti. And then if someone would read the book and take an interest and then follow up by visiting the temple, there wouldn't be anyone in the temple to greet them because everyone is out on book distribution. So, right. The idea of making space for someone starts, I think, with getting your best people to meet the newcomers for the first time. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's some people have that natural skill of hospitality. Other people can be taught the skill, but yeah, your best, friendliest, hospitable people should be stationed at the doors of our temple, at the very least at the Sunday feast, and with antennas up and ready to notice anyone that might be new. I grew up in the Mormon tradition, and they're also models of hospitality. They keep their communities deliberately small so that everyone there immediately knows if there's someone who's new to the community shows up that day, and they have that mood of every member as a missionary, that they each feel compelled to welcome that person. And so that's the kind of loving culture we want to have. We've got that love in our hearts, but it's just over time, institutions can start to turn inward, circle the wagons, and we forget that public-facing missionary focus that was so dear to Prabhupada and part of his original mission and vision.
I've been to Indian homes who just drop everything. Whatever they were doing, whatever they were in the middle of, they would literally drop everything and welcome me, sit down to talk to me, and cook me a meal. Now that ethic is pretty much ubiquitous throughout all cultures. You subordinate yourself to the guest. Our culture even goes so far as to say, Atiti Deva Bhavan, your guest might be God in disguise, come to just test you. He's given you blessing, he's given you a house, he's given you food, But he wants to see whether now you close the doors against every other of his children, or whether you lock the door and hoard all that for yourself.
Yeah, that's so true. I've experienced the same thing, and those same families would be wounded if you didn't accept their hospitality. I mean, it's so a part of their DNA. And yeah, it's one of those ubiquitous principles in every religious tradition. You welcome the stranger. I was just looking recently, even in Greek culture, one of Zeus's names was Xenios Zeus. It's where we get the word xenophobia from, fear of the stranger. And so in that culture, Zeus would come down into cities to see, and disguise as a stranger, to see if the people in this world would show him hospitality. And when they wouldn't, then judgment would fall upon that city. Or you think of God coming in the form of 3 angels to Abraham long ago, and how he was looking for someone who would show hospitality. And Abraham washes the feet of these 3 strangers and prepares them a meal. And certainly in our culture, in so many ways, in Vaishnava tradition, we uphold that, I think, above all the traditions. And there's so many stories and instructions in our scriptures about showing hospitality.
There are even indications that should your enemy, someone who's tried to do you harm, kill you in the past, appear unannounced at your door, you would receive him in such a way that he would not perceive there was the slightest enmity between the two of you. That as long as that person was under your roof, you would conduct yourself as if you were the best of friends, even when otherwise that person is your worst enemy.
Yeah, isn't there a story of Arjuna visiting, was it Duryodhana, to get the 4 arrows? And he was duty bound to protect Arjuna in his home, even though he was his hated enemy, or the 5 arrows rather. Yeah, and to give him anything he asked, including the entire kingdom.
Now, if Duryodhana could do that, we should set a better example at our temples. It's true. Yeah. Duryodhana said, "You're my guest, so you just ask for the kingdom without a fight." That's what he said.
Yes.
And that was only because of one principle, the principle of hospitality.
Yeah, and you know, not only the great saints and sages and transcendental characters in our scriptures, but you know, Krishna himself models hospitality with Sudama, you know, welcoming his friend in, washing his feet, taking care of his needs. So he's not only messaging that we should be a people of holy hospitality, he's modeling that for all of us.
There was a story, I believe, where some guests came to the temple and Prabhupada asked them to give prasadam to the guests. And they said, well, the prasadam's all gone. And Prabhupada said, well, go in the kitchen and cook. He didn't accept the excuse that prasadam's all gone. He said, hospitality is a non-negotiable ethic. It's not anything for which you can legitimately have an excuse. It's inexcusable to not receive the guests with a water sitting place. And Prabhupada set the standard higher, prasadam as well.
Yeah, when you read those early stories of the great care that he gave those very first disciples of his, and think about the backgrounds they came from and what they were bringing into his living space. And yet he was ever the welcoming host. He was cooking for them. He was teaching them how to cook. He really modeled for us the mood he wants us to carry forward in this society.
I've seen devotees, when guests come, again, this is a generalization. It doesn't apply to everybody. There are significant exceptions, but I've seen a phenomenon that oftentimes when a guest comes, a devotee suddenly remembers some service he has to do for Krishna. It almost seems like the guest stimulates his cerebral cortex to remember that service that he's been putting off for some time. Now, that's not making space for the new arrival, is it?
No, and in fact, it's sadly, it's a spiritual blind spot in our society sometimes, that we don't see that when a visitor comes, that means Krishna is already at work. And our simple task is just to join him in his work. He's brought that soul to that temple through how many lifetimes to now hear this bhakti message. And the fact that they're there is a divine appointment. So everything else should be set aside, in my estimation, to welcome that guest and to spend as much time as we can with them to help them understand not only what they're seeing, but a little bit of our philosophy, that we're planting seeds. And who knows what's going to happen with that seed. Everyone's on a continuum towards Krishna. And all that Krishna asks for us is the moment our life intersects with another living entity, that we help move them a little bit closer to Krishna, even if it's with the simplest act of kindness.
It must be an irony that Krishna has spoken to them from within the heart, directed them to come, directed their footsteps to the temple, and someone can't greet them because they're too busy serving Krishna. What's all that about?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. You know, I think I've shared the story with you before that the very first temple I visited, I was clearly didn't know what I was doing, but there was a few devotees there. So I approached one and said, "Hey, I'm just learning about this tradition and I have a couple questions." And he answered one or two. And then he said to me, "Prabhu, I need to finish my rounds." And then he turned and walked away. And not knowing what any of that language meant, I thought Prabhu was a derogatory term. Like, you idiot, you know, I've got more important things to do. And I didn't know what it meant. I need to finish my rounds. The only language reference I had to rounds was the number of rounds that a shooter fires to his victim. You know, they'll say the mass murderer shot 15 rounds. And he might as well have shot bullets in my heart, because I felt so low, so unimportant, that I'm glad, simply by Krishna's mercy, that I kept trying to penetrate this culture. And I'm sure he's a wonderful devotee, and he was trying to finish, you know, a vow and a commitment, but it was a missed opportunity that all of us could be guilty of if we're not attentive.
Prabhupada was comfortable in Vrindavan. Why did he accept all the difficulties to come to the West? Similarly, you know, we have our service. It's familiar, it's comfortable, it's routine. We're serving God. But then why would Prabhupada leverage himself out of a perfect situation in Vrindavan to come to the West if his emphasis wasn't more on outreach? He could have worshiped the deities. He was in the Radha temple. It's the highest deity, the highest opportunity to worship. But he prioritized reaching out to the fallen conditioned souls. I've heard that if you're in the middle of arti and a guest arrives, Krishna blesses you. If you put down the arti utensils, interrupt the arti, go greet that person properly, and then only after that guest is satisfied, come back and finish the arti.
Yeah, that must be so pleasing to the Lord. What higher worship can we offer than to again recognize that he's seated in every human soul, and this is a work that Krishna has already begun, that we're just continuing. Yeah, it's such a nice mood. And for everything Prabhupada did was in this mood of hospitality, like you say, just to get the courage to walk up that ramp of the Jaladuta and come to the Western world was making space, not only for a person entering our temple, but for the whole world. He wanted to create a society that would welcome the whole world into it.
That was a wonderful discussion, Thomas. Thank you for being so much an example, personifying the principle of hospitality. This would comprise, with some editing, maybe one segment of what I think you have within you the potential for 3 or 4 segments. Do you want to